Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to a special JCAN, Jewish Climate Action Network webinar on the climate crisis in Israel. I am Matt Liebman. I am a member of the steering committee for the Jewish Climate Action Network, or JCAN. And with Thea and Fred, and I think I saw Janet here as well, and others at JCAN, I'm hosting today's session. If you don't know JCAN, we started in 2013, and our mission is to provide a Jewish voice in responding to the climate crisis. We hold educational conferences and workshops and webinars related to climate change and how institutions, especially synagogues, can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and conserve energy. And we mobilize Jewish communities to take leadership and participate in climate campaigns. Our president is here. Fred, you have a word or two do you want to say?
Welcome, everyone. Matt, thank you so much for playing the introductory music, which was awesome. And if you could tell us when it was recorded, we'd love to know. But anyway, thank you so much for putting this program together, Matt. And thank you, Thea, and thank you, Janet, for all the work behind the scenes. And thank you especially to our speaker.
Thank you, Fred. Well, I'm not sure when that recording was produced, but I'll try to find out. But I think it's pretty recent. So we picked the topic, climate crisis in Israel, and scheduled it for today, partly because it is Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Israel Independence Day, and partly because it's a timely topic. As everyone knows, this year's celebrations are probably muted. It's a bittersweet time in Israel right now with the war and the hostages and everything else going on. But I don't need to explain that to everybody. But you probably don't know what's going on in Israel regarding how they're combating climate change. Today, we have a speaker from Israel, Dr. Tamara Lev, who is the climate policy director for the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. And for the last few years, however, she has been in the Israel Institute. She's been the Israel Institute Postdoctoral Teaching Fellow at Boston University. To properly introduce her, we have Rachel Kanar, who is the Executive Director of the American Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel, or Nature Israel. I met Rachel when our synagogue in Acton, Congregation Beth Elohim, hosted her for our Tu B'Shvat celebration. And she told us that her organization in Israel is kind of like a mashup of some local organizations that most of you are probably familiar with in Massachusetts, like the Nature Conservancy for habitat protection, the Appalachian Mountain Club for hiking trails, and the Conservation Law Foundation, which is a major legal advocate for environmental protection. And Rachel is based in the Boston area. So Dr. Lev will speak for about 40 minutes. During her presentation, please do not send any chats. It's kind of distracting. But after her presentation, I will open it up to questions. Probably the best way is to send a chat to me, JCAN-MA host. You can see me there. And you can send a question through the chat, and I will relay it to our speaker. As I mentioned before, as you know, the session is already started to be recorded. So please welcome Rachel Kanar.
Hi, you can see, I want to tell you just a word. First of all, thank you so much, Matt, for inviting Dr. Lev. And I'm going to say just a word about SPNI before we introduce Dr. Lev, because she is not going to be giving an overview of the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. And you noticed that Matt referred to us, we're the American Friends of, but it's really a mouthful to say the American Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. So we just go by Nature Israel now is our nickname, and then everyone can understand us. We've been around for just 32 years, or no, maybe, oh, if you count, 38 years, I just realized. 38 years this American support organization has existed to support the Society for the Protection of Nature that was founded in 1953. Last year marked the 70th anniversary of the organization. So Israel is 76, and SPNI, the acronym as we use in English, is 70. So Israel has grown up with SPNI, which has very much shaped the culture of Israel to be one that has some really remarkable conservation efforts that you can see here behind me. This is from the hula bird migration, and this was the impetus for the founding of the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. You might have heard about draining the swamps and making the desert bloom. Well, there were some very smart people that were saying, don't drain the swamps. That would be a bad idea. They couldn't save all of them, but they could save the Hula Lake. And this was the impetus and the founding for SPNI. And since then, SPNI has been very, very involved in all conservation and wildlife protection efforts, the leader in Israel in all environmental work. There's a number of organizations, but SPNI is by far and away the largest, the oldest, and the most impactful, leading the way in conservation and wildlife protection, and now rewilding, which you will hear more about from Dr. Lev today. Also, all environmental education in Israel in all school systems, public and private, religious, secular, Arab, Jewish, everyone learns about the environment from SPNI. Also, we are leading in ecotourism using a Sierra Club type model where, and this is the reason most Americans haven't heard about SPNI, because the budget of SPNI has been funded in large part by Israeli members, and the ecotourism that is done where the people of Israel have learned to love nature and love spending time in nature. And that is, again, thanks to SPNI. So we do just a world of things, but that's all I'm going to talk about now. And of course, the other thing that we do is create policies and policies that, for example, address climate change. Dr. Lev, you already heard, is the climate policy director for SPNI. And she was for this academic year, the Israel Institute Postdoctoral Teaching Fellow at the Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies at Boston University. Tamara holds an LLB from the Hebrew University and a PhD from Tel Aviv University of Law. After completing her PhD, Tamara joined the Israeli Department of Justice and worked under the Deputy Attorney General in environmental law and policy, offshore oil and gas regulation, and related fields. Tamara has been teaching environmental law at Tel Aviv University since 2020 and also served as a board member of the Israel Society for Ecology and Environmental Sciences. I now introduce you to Dr. Tamara Lev.
Thank you very much for having me tonight, and thank you, Matt, for organizing this, and of course, Rachel, for the introduction. As it was mentioned before, it's Independence Day today, and in these difficult days, it's hard to say happy holiday. We were just discussing before, what do you say in such a day? And I believe everyone should say what they feel, but what I feel is that it's not really a happy day. So it's hard to wish like happy holiday. But there are other things that we could wish. First of all, we wish from all of our heart for the 132 hostages, some alive and some are already dead in Gaza, to come back. And personally, I also wish for our country, my country, that the war ends and we can go back to fight together other wars, like the common battle against climate change and for our nature. And that's what I'll talk about today, of course. I'm going to share my screen, and you're very welcome later, of course, to ask questions, and also, to give any comments and thought that you'd have at the end. So, second, let's make sure that it passes. Yeah. Do you see the next slide now? Yeah. Okay. So as I was introduced already, I'm the Climate Policy Director at SPNI. As Rachel said, we're working in through several routes. Education is very big, of course, very big way to change reality, and tourism and public campaigns. And one of the major ways that we are working on is policy. We're working with policy makers, with decision makers. We design policy that we believe is the correct one and try to push it through for the protection of the nature. And I'm also serving as the Israeli Institute. I'm not going to talk a lot about climate change generally, but just to make sure that we're at the same page. Where do we stand today? We all know that we've been witnessing, and science has been witnessing, rising temperature ever since the Industrial Revolution, mid-19th century, more or less, which is also being presented in a very clear, very dominant and clear way in the sea level rise. And we also all know, and I'm sure that the people that are here, JCAN knows that this is directly related to the amount of carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere. I like to start with this slide, which is from the NASA website, which is a very useful website if you're looking for visual climate change graphs. Just shows that no matter how we're going to try to say that things are natural and we cannot do anything because warming and cooling is a natural thing for our planet, we can clearly see from 800,000 years ago how our Earth has been warming and cooling until the 19th century, beginning of 20th century, when cooling is not witnessed anymore. We should have been now, by the natural trend, in the cooling period, but we have been only witnessing rise of temperature, and we've recently been informed that by the UN scientists that 2023 was the warmest year since global records began in 1850, and also according to the science that is researching older days. So that's kind of where we start from. In Israel, when we look at what's happening with climate change, then we witness it in a greater, stronger, and basically faster way. Already today, we have all kind of scientific proofs that shows us that the temperature in Israel increased in a faster manner than the global mean. According to the Meteorological Institute, it's probably would be double the pace of the global mean. But in any case, it's much faster. The Mediterranean Sea warms 3 times faster. It's already a warm sea. And the Levant area, the eastern part of the Mediterranean, and it is warming 3 times faster than the global average. And we're already witnessing decreasing precipitation. Not only that we have less rain coming, it is also dense in fewer days, which means we have more hot days, more warm days, more hot days, more very hot days, which mean more fires. And then we have less days with rain, which is heavier because more floodings. So we have this chain that we see everywhere. In Israel, it's like we call it a hotspot because you can see it in a very dense manner. Very recently, we had an update from the state controller a month ago. He published an update of a report that he wrote 3 years ago about Israel and climate change. Now, as you know, state controller is appointed by the government. It's not an environmental organization that is saying that. That is somebody who is within the government, who is checking and researching from within the government and critiques its action from within. He's appointed by the government. And what he's talking about is what is the significance of those changes? Are Is it important? Maybe it's okay. Okay, we'll be a little bit warmer. So the climate change that Israel is expected to experience will be more significant, with heavy consequences for its economic, social, and security resilience. So we have damages that we expect to see for agriculture crops. Not only now we're suffering from lack of employees and lots of other problems which are not related to climate change, we're going to have this also affecting water, good, and energy, as well as damage to Israel infrastructure, because our road, desalination plant, energy facilities, electricity, our water, they're all relying on natural resources. And when they're going to be under extreme climate events that are going to be, we're going to witness more and more, they may see a real collapse. And in the security aspect, regional climate change will bring more battles over natural resources that are in short, and that may lead to unrest that we are already witnessing in Africa, to refugees, and to more conflict. So this is not only a natural thing, it's also has other impact. Now, Israel is not only a hotspot from climate change perspective. Israel is also a hotspot for we're happy to say that it's also a hotspot from ecological perspective. What we see here is an interesting research that was published in Nature, where they tried to locate all the most important places from biodiversity aspect, that if we were to save only 2% or 1.5% of the world places, what would be the most important places from ecological and biodiversity perspective? And as we can see, I think I have an error here to show you that Israel is part of that. Most of the area that is surrounding the Mediterranean is part of that hotspot, is part of those extremely important areas that we must conserve. And that is because we have a unique location, first of all. Israel is located just at the, you can see here, at the junction between the three continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. And that brings unique climates to this place. And we have it's one of the most dense places for both fauna and flora. And if we can see here that the amount of species that we have per kilometer, and just if we kind of compare it, when we see look at the flora species at the upper graph, we see Israel with more than 80 species per kilometer, while you can see all kind of countries in Europe which are much less, or California, which then a little bit more than 20. When we look about the birds species, we also see that Israel has is unique and has much more birds per kilometer than many, not any, but most countries in the world. You probably also know that Israel, because again of this location, is a global migration, extremely important global migration pathway for the birds that are migrating from the northern European when they start to get cool in the fall. Millions of birds are starting to migrate to Africa, to the warmer countries, and then they go back in the spring when Europe and Asia starts to warm. And most of these birds cannot just cross the sea because it's too long for them. They need a pathway where they can stop and rest. They need water bodies and aquatic areas where they can rest. And Israel is located just on this specific, very even thin pathway that they move through. So we understand that we are a hotspot from both climate change perspective and from ecological perspective. What do we have to do? Before showing you that, what do we have to do? So you probably all heard about adaptation and mitigation. I will say, so we can again be on the same page, we must be prepared to what is coming, which is we must adapt to it, and that's why we call it adaptation. But we also must work to mitigate it, to stop the changes from happening, because if they continue at the same pace, we won't be able to stop them in the future. So we must work on both directions. And when we talk about mitigation, one thing that is extremely important to remember, no matter how much we're going to talk about nature and nature protection, is that in order to stop climate change and to mitigate it, we must stop use fossil fuels. There is no other way. You know, already back in 1952 to 59, which is before the Beatles released their first song, before we heard the address of I Have a Dream, and before the men stepped on the moon, already in 1959, Professor Edward Teller, who was already back then famous professor from Columbia University, said whenever you burn conventional fuel, you create carbon dioxide. It's present in the atmosphere, causes a greenhouse effect. It is very simple science. There is no way to be confused about that. And we know that for more than 70 years. So there is no other way to say it. The way to stop climate change is to stop use fossil fuel. That is one thing that we really have to remember. But we also have to remember why we're battling it. That it's not the only thing that we have to take care about. We must understand and implement the inseparable nature of climate, biodiversity, and our quality of life. Nature is part of our solution to climate change. It cannot do it by itself. We must move on from fossil fuels, but we cannot stop and handle climate change without giving nature its acute and critical place. This report that you see the picture of is a report that was written for the first time a couple of years ago, by both platforms in the UN that are working on two crises, basically. The IPCC, you may have heard, is the International Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. That's a group of scientists that are sitting and telling the United Nations what is the science saying about climate change. The IPBES is the parallel one that works about biodiversity and ecosystem, because there is another convention that deals with that. And they never sat together until pretty recently. And in this report, they sat together and said, this is what we have to do in order to tackle both crises together. So, and as you know, I'm not going to say a lot about that, but we must have nature as part of our mitigation, because nature, the forests and the oceans, they capture and fix half of the carbon emission that we are emitting. Half of the emission would not go to the atmosphere only because of the nature that we're having. Of course, if we will continue to ruin it, it won't do that. It already is doing less and less. It does that, through the processes of respiration and photosynthesis. And again, some recent researchers showed that we can reach we can mitigate up to 10 gigaton CO2 per year only by nature, by protecting it better, by managing it better, and by restoring and rewilding it. Now, this 10 gigaton, that means we are emitting globally a little bit more than 50 per year, 52, 55, 56. So if we could save 10 out of that only with nature, that is a very significant amount. So that's why nature is important for mitigation. Nature is also extremely important for adaptation, for us to be ready, because if we're going to have much more rain in much less days, we need to absorb this water somehow. And for this, we have to rely on what nature can offer us. If we'll continue to put all our rivers into concrete canals, then once we have a little bit too much water, they don't have where to go. This water, they can't flow nowhere, and they're going to flood our cities. We saw that in Israel in recent years. Again and again, people died because of that. But if we allow rivers, if we plan rivers to run their more or less natural route, to have some wide space where they could absorb the water, if we allow our natural forests to cool the areas, if we use nature-based solution, we could adapt to nature much, much better. And that's why there is a global kind of initiative to start making sure that we are protecting nature and stop destroying it. The aim is to reach by 2030, that's a global initiative, to zero net of loss of nature. That means that by 2030, we're going to start have each year more nature than the nature that we destroy. Well, that's the goal. We'll see if we get there. So now we're going to go back to Israel. We understood that it's a hotspot. We understand what do we have to do, what's happening in Israel, and what's the policy. So when we talk about mitigation, currently Israel is producing less than 15% of its energy from renewable. We're one of the countries with most sunny days in the world per year, but we're not using it enough. We are still producing only 15%, less than 15% from renewable energy, mainly from solar panels. Now, if we look at the summer winter here, we'll see that it doesn't matter. There is very little difference between the summer and the winter. So this would not be the reason. What is the reason that we produce so little from renewables? I could say several reasons, okay? It's not only one reason. But for in the recent years, the major reason is this. Israel not Israel, private companies, but with Israeli licenses, have found a very big natural gas, fossil gas in offshore Israel. The biggest two are Leviathan and Tamar, you may have heard of them. And since 2010, we've been receiving natural gas from our offshore, and most of our coal-based energy moved to be natural gas-based energy. We moved from producing about 60 or 70% of our energy from coal and oil to the same amount, about 60%, not all the time, but mostly from this gas. When it was first found in the beginning of this century, the big deposits were found actually in 2009 and 2010. When they were first found, it was clear that we must use them because renewable and solar energy was still very expensive and not efficient enough. We couldn't save it, we couldn't use it. So it was very clear that this is going to be a major resource. Of course, it also produced income to Israel by taxes. It was also said to be to allow Israel much more energy independence. So it was really important. But the idea was back then that this will be the bridge until we can reach renewables. However, what happens that it's not this bridge, we don't see its end right now. We don't see where it ends. The renewables increased very little during this 15 years, and we've been relying more and more on these deposits, on these gas deposits, and the government is now working to search for more deposits in order to have more gas, while it is allowing these companies to export a lot of this gas. More than half of the gas that is in this deposit is exported by the companies. So this is the major reason that we cannot see still transformation to the renewable. Now, how does this happen? Why? Because we have fossil fuels, we are not moving to renewables. So most importantly is the incentives. The fossil fuels energy receives, and that's from the state comptroller, the last update. The fossil fuels receive 33 times more incentives than the renewable. There's no way to move in such a way. Israel still do not have a carbon tax, and our greenhouse gas emissions are not of a very tiny, small country. It's actually of a middle-sized country. And if we find more gas, then we're going to produce even more. When we look at how many how much Israel uses energy that is low emission, renewables, in other words, we see that Israel is almost at the bottom of the list. Only the Middle East, the oil-producing countries they have less renewable than us. This is not a very positive picture, but this is where we are. Now, how can this happen? The world is going to renewables. Israel has a resolution, governmental resolution, back in 2021, 3 years ago. According to this resolution, we are supposed to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 2030 in 27%, and by 2050 in 85%. That is reduction of greenhouse emissions. This is not a very ambitious goals, because most of the modern Western world pledged to reduce 50% by 2030, at least, it's changing, of course, but at least 50, which is also what the IPCC said that is required, and most of the countries pledged to reach net zero by 2050. But the main problem is that even we're not only on the pace of that. Right now in 2024, we have only increased the amount of emission by 1% already. So we're just not on the right path. The government approved just recently, last month, a climate bill. After about 3 years of discussing it, the government approved the bill. It is now in the parliament. It still hasn't passed. But the bill arrived to the parliament after it was basically torn up totally, and it is a very flexible bill that would probably not change a lot. It doesn't set any requirements that would make the government work differently. It would allow the government, it would kind of make an infrastructure for the ministries and for the Ministry of Environmental Protection to work better toward that. But it doesn't have any really obligating kind of goals. When we talk about adaptation, I'm not going to go much into that. Let me just say that the only plan that Israel has for adaptation is now in a draft version. We just sent our comments for the draft version of the adaptation plan for Israel 2024. It's a plan that was made by the Ministry of Environmental Protection. All the ministries are supposed to do that, but they haven't still done that. So currently, 2024, Israel does not have an adaptation plan. We do have several reports that brings the data that is needed. We have a report that was done by the Ministry of Environmental Protection about the sea level, how much it's going to rise, which is extremely important when you want to plan, for example, for the planning. We also have a report about the additional mortality from heat waves. So we're starting to have data. The Ministry of Environmental Protection is indeed trying to do the best it can to produce data, but we still don't see how it is implemented into policy. So what it should do. I'm going to move there so we can learn a little bit about what SPNI is suggesting, and not only suggesting in the paper. We're really working with the policymaker to try to convince them and implement them and assist them, and then we could also open it to question. So first of all, as I said, we must stop planning new offshore gas. We understand that the current facilities that we have, the current gas that we have, Leviathan and Tamar, we won't be able to stop that. That is the gas that is going to be to supply us energy for the several coming years. But we must start to pass on to solar energy. We are pushing very much hard that these solar panels must be on roofs and not in the open spaces. Very little we should take from the open spaces, because we have enough built to cover with solar panels to have enough energy for Israel. It's really not needed to take too much of the open spaces. In some places we do, and then we agree about that. We are trying to be also practical. We're not trying to take it to the extreme, but we must move to have to use solar panel on the roofs and what we call double usage. Solar panel, for example, as we see here in the picture, above agricultural growings. So you have the same land that is used for agriculture also used for solar panels. And we are working on several projects like that. However, the Israeli government announced that it is going to search for more fields, which means more parts of our Mediterranean Sea, from our water, are going to be disturbed. Very important area from ecological point of view. So it's going to both harm nature and make sure that we are continuing to relying on the gas for the years to come. So Society for Protection of Nature have filed a petition against this decision to expand and make more exploration in the sea. We're still waiting for the discussion in the Supreme Court of Justice. It was postponed now again to the end of 2024, while the government is continuing with the bid for the new exploration. So it's a little bit frustrating, but we are not losing hope. In the adaptation side, we are all the time pushing and assisting the government to adopt more nature-based solutions that are based on the nature ability to assist us. Ecosystem conservation, which is the most efficient way to battle climate change and to save nature, restoration, and rewilding. We are focusing on the rivers and aquatic habitat conservation and restoration because they are really extremely important in Israel, and they are also beneficial for climate change. SPNI has been doing that nature conservation and recently more rewilding since the 50s. As Rachel said in the beginning, our first campaign was to save the Hula Lake, which part of which we managed to do. There were throughout the year, several campaigns which were very successful. Some, of course, also failed, but some of the most successful campaigns were led by SPNI. And today we are leading the next one, which we really hope would be successful. And that is, we call it Startup Nature. And that is to save and to save the wetlands and the aquatic areas that has been destroyed in Israel. Because the wetlands in the Middle East, and especially in Israel, are really important for the migration of the birds, which I said before, but they're really also important for the adaptation for climate change, for cooling the areas, and for allowing sometimes even carbon fixation. So what we've done in that, I'll say shortly, so we still have time for questions. We've mapped several places in Israel, which we believe are the most important. You can see here in the north, around the Hula Lake, and in the just south of the Sea of Galilee, of the Kinneret, in the Bet Shean area, and next to the shore around the Carmel coast, and a little bit south in En Hefer. And in these places, we are trying to promote this rewilding kind of spot. This one, for example, which is the one that is already almost kind of exercise. It was already done, and we're now in the kind of next level of next stage of it. Is just south of the Kinneret, next to kibbutz that is called Kfar Opin. There was fish pond there. There were many fish ponds in Israel, which was a very successful business for many years, but which became less and less economic for all kinds of reasons. And we're trying to not take those regions and make them into industrial areas or solar panels, but make them, rewild them, make them nature again. So this place in the Amud Reservoir was already done, and this is how it looks today after it was totally neglected for years. And we're hoping to do that in several other places. Another example that some of you may know is the Gazelle Valley in Jerusalem. That is an example of how we can make kind of a rewild and nature, re-nature area in the city. This valley in Jerusalem is located between neighborhoods, and the municipality was going to build a new neighborhood there in that place. But this was a very unique place where a family of gazelle were living, and if this neighborhood was to build, then they were, of course, be extinct. And a huge campaign of the people, the citizens there who live there with the Society for Protection of Nature, managed to stop that, and not only to stop the plan, but to convince the municipality to make this the biggest urban park that we have in Israel. We have two rivers that are flowing into this area because it's it's a valley, which was also flooded many times. So now we have, not only we have this beautiful gazelle that today we have more than 80 gazelles there, and a lively ecosystem with birds and many other animals there. We also have a hydrological system that makes sure that there would be no flooding in the winter, that takes the drains that collect the water and allow them to stay there and spill it into the ground slowly. So it's a win-win. It's a beautiful place for tourists, for education, for the people that live there, and it's a full ecosystem, and it's cool the area and allow us to a better adaptation to climate change. I would love to, since we don't have too much time, I think I would stop here, and I would love to hear some questions and comments and your thoughts.
Thank you very much for the presentation. That was excellent. A really good overview and general and also specific, because I know people want to know what's specifically happening in Israel. So the first question is from Judith. Are you aware of the ERA, the Eco Restoration Alliance, an international organization of brilliant earth scientists who are recreating verdant land from deserts, and they are bringing back healthy water cycles where they have been lost and recreating wetlands through reintroduction of beavers and much more? So same idea. So are you aware of that organization?
I'm not sure I'm aware of this organization, but we are definitely working with other organizations that are doing rewilding. We definitely do not invent anything. We try not to invent anything. We work closely with the European partners, with BirdLife International. So yeah, we do work with lots of experts to try to bring that. So I'm not sure I know this exact organization, but I'll have a look.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Brett, who asks, how is the offshore wind potential? You talked a little bit about solar potential, but you didn't talk about offshore wind.
Yeah, so thanks for that question, because I'll say two things about the wind. First of all, we have several turbines in the north of Israel, which are producing so little, less than 0.001% of our energy, while they are harming birds in really critical ways. They kill birds, and as Israel is sitting just on this migration way of birds, we are highly against the turbines in the Golan Heights and on the territorial in the terrestrial of Israel. Not because we're against turbine, because on the in the trade-off of how much energy you can produce from the wind that we have, we're not such a windy place, and the damage that it does to the birds, no, it just doesn't worth it. Solar in Israel is so much better. We have so much sun. When you talk about the offshore and like marine turbines, we still don't know exactly how it's going to affect the nature, the ecosystem, and the birds. We have some bad signs that it's not the best solution, but it still has to be checked. So I'm not going to say totally no. It might be. We do have a coastline that may be good for that. Maybe in some places where we don't have a lot of ecosystem and birds, maybe that would be the option. And we're kind of starting to check that.
Thank you. Rachel has her hand up. I think she probably wants to
get a hand
reference
up.
some of the resources from Nature Israel before we continue.
I just wanted people to know that I put a link to Startup Nature website that I want you to also check out Nature Israel, but we created a whole special website for the Startup Nature project that includes a short video. So if you're interested to learn more about the nature-based solutions and some of what Tamara spoke of today in Startup Nature, you can click on the link in the chat. That's all.
Thank you. I am going to go out of the order of the people that submitted the questions to continue on the theme of energy resources. Nancy asked, I had to step away briefly. Did you mention the gas terminal in Eilat, where the previous government had blocked the project, but the current coalition reversed that and is moving ahead?
Yeah, that's a huge thing. It's not gas there, it's actually oil. What's happening in the Red Sea, in the southern Israel, is that there is a company that is working there for many, many years, which was established by the government in Israel and the previous government of Iran. And for that reason, it is kind of a very hush-hush security company, and nobody knows what happened there. Its name is Katza. This company, what it does, it transport oil from the Persian Gulf, and through the Gulf of Eilat, it brings us to the land, and then it drives it, or it flows in pipeline all the way to the Mediterranean, and from there to Europe. And that is extremely dangerous, because when you bring oil to such a sensitive ecosystem of coral in Eilat, it is mad, and it doesn't serve even the energy market in Israel, not at all. It's only to transport it to Europe. So the previous government, it's been going for many years, but in a very small scope. The previous government made a decision not to widen the scope of that, to leave it in a very small scope. Because after the Abraham Accords were signed, we're trying to push through a deal to make it much bigger, to pass through, to transport a bigger amount of oil. So the previous government stopped it and decided that they're not going to put any more than what is now. This is called a zero additional risk policy. And current government we're now hearing, they're talking about canceling this policy and increase in a very significant amount the allowed oil to go through there. And that is truly, I don't know how to say it. It's crazy, because Eilat is such a touristic place, and it's all based on these coral seas. And if you bring there big amount of oil, you take such a risk, and it's not clear why should we take that risk. So we're trying to fight that very hard.
Thank you. I'm going to let David Schreiber ask his questions, because he's got his hand raised and I can't pronounce his question. So maybe it has relevance to what we're just talking about right now. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, it's a little bit specific, because I used to live in that neighborhood. You mentioned the banyas, and I was wondering if anything was planned for Emek Jalud, now that the fish ponds are no longer as profitable as they had been 40 years ago when I was living there.
So which place exactly you're asking about?
I'm asking about Emek Jalud, Gilboa, and toward Shan.
Yeah.
That region,
Yeah.
somewhat northwest of Bet Shan.
Yeah. So we are working on several places there. The thing is that each place where there are, for example, fish ponds, if we want to restore it, we need to bring the budget for it. Nobody's going to do it. So the people, for example, the kibbutzim, that they had this fish pond, now they have this empty place. They're looking to what to do with it. And when there is a land and somebody is looking forward to it, people are starting to fight over it. So some people would like to build on it. Others would like to put solar panels on the water. And then they say to the kibbutz, we'll put the solar panel for you and you'll get the money from it. And we're saying, no, make nature out of it. Put the solar panel on the roof. That's really important. But let's do the nature. But in order for them to do that, they need the resources. So we need to bring up the money. We did that in several places. The Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel, which is an NGO, non-profit, non-governmental, brought the money from donation and from members to do that. So it's a question of budget, and not only. Also, we have to convince the kibbutz that this is really what they want to do and that what's the best for them. We have to make sure that regulatory allows it to do that. So we're trying to do that. I'm not sure that specifically in that location right now, but we are working on pretty much several places.
Okay.
Can I jump in? Can I just jump in really quickly and say
Sure.
something about that, since my job is the fundraising? I can say that raising money for this Startup Nature project is the primary focus of all of our major fundraising right now. And when I say major fundraising, so members help support the conservation and wildlife protection ongoing work. But we're out there trying to raise tens of millions of dollars, right, over the next this 10-year period to restore or rewild. I think it's 25% of Israel's original wetland area, definitely including these kind of areas that you're talking about that Tamara showed on the map. But I should just let people know we've started this now, and that we have raised already a few, we've raised some money that we've already restored 2 sites, and those sites have drawn the attention of major conservation foundations and even corporate water offset business, because there's corporations that need water offsets, and there's people looking for carbon offsets. And so this Startup Nature project is a really big deal, is multi-million-dollar project that people that are looking at nature-based solutions to mitigate, to help with climate change are investing in. And of course, if you or anyone you know is interested in those kind of major investments, please drop me a note in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to, at the very end, ask about, what can people do? And so we'll get back to you there. Thank you for reminding us, Rachel. Getting back to some of the questions about the government, there is a question about the current environmental protection minister. She seems to be in over her head and constantly gets outmaneuvered by the energy minister and finance minister when it comes to putting together bills for the Knesset to consider.
Yes,
So,
unfortunately,
Dr. Lev, can you comment on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, we've been working with governments many years, all kind of governments, right, left, and we're cooperating pretty good with many of the ministries, really from all parties. Unfortunately, currently, it's been the most difficult of all times. It is a combination of the fact that the ministry is very weak. I don't know if you know the history and of the politics, but the Ministry of Environment, that is currently the Ministry of Environmental Protection, she was in another party, the previous government. She's probably the major one who made the previous government fall, and that's why she got this position, which means that she's very much controlled by the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Energy and Finance. So she's very weak, and she's not very enough. She's not strong enough. But I must say that even in previous governments, unfortunately, one that were more towards nature protection, the Ministry of Energy has been very strong the last 15 years, and much stronger than the Ministry of Environmental Protection. So it's difficult now, but it was also difficult before.
Thank you. Lynn has a question. I was going to read it, but she's got her hand raised. So why don't you go ahead, Lynn?
We can't hear you. You're on mute.
Thank you. There's a big elephant in the room, and that's the war that's going on right now and the cost, the real environmental cost of this war. Is there anybody doing research on that and anything published that you could send to us that we could learn something about the cost? We know about the cost to the people, but what about the cost to the environment?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there's been a huge damage both in the south the region which most of the attacks started, and also in the north. And first of all, the SPNI is pretty much very much involved in both researching what's going on and suggesting restoration of the area. There are some initial, I think, reports that I have to look for. It's not my field, but I could look or who has them to send you. But we've been involved in trying to push towards that. Now there is this stage where they plan how to restore everything. And as usual, there are forces that are pushing towards restoring it in a very commercial, industrial ways. You know, take all the south, which is one of the most unique open areas that we have, all the west part of the Negev, where just along the border with Gaza and inside. And we are working and we are fighting hard that this is not going to be the case, that they're not going to put their like hundreds of kilometers of solar panels, but put them on the roof. They have plenty of roof because this is a very low building, and also how to restore nature there. And for that, of course, we need to understand what happened there. We have people that were there from day one with the army, going inside, going there, traveling to see what's going on, to assist the army, understanding where they are according to nature, understanding what's happening according to what the animals are doing. So yes, we have people that are very much into it, and I have to check what kind of reports are already written and what's on the way, and I'll look
If
for
you sent
something.
that to your contact at JCAN, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Stanley, did you have a question related to that? I saw your hand up and it sounded like you were nodding or looking like you were nodding.
Two things I wish to make to your attention. Your name is Tamara. Are you familiar, first of all, with the models, that the global models of climate change? One is called En-ROADS, which has been used successfully in COP28, COP29, to show the importance of getting rid of fossil fuels. And as you know, the last COP, they finally put into the system to remove fossil fuels. Secondly, there is also an organization which here in the United States and also works with Israel, the Jewish National Fund, that will definitely help you finance money for your results that you wish to come about for education using nature. And thirdly, there's a program called NOVA that's shown under PBS. A gentleman by the name of Richard Attenborough, who's now in his 90s, who put together a movie exactly what you are projecting, and that is to use nature to help solve the climate crisis. And that movie can be used to show in Israel to get money for your organizational theories that you're projecting. Yeah. So I hope you will look into those items.
Yeah, thank you. David Attenborough's movie is, of course, a great inspiration. I many times quote him in my talks, and we learn a lot from him and from his movies. The Jewish Fund, we are working closely with all the institutional organizations in Israel, the Nature Authority and the Jewish Fund. Their interests are not always aligned with ours. Sometimes, yes, sometimes we do a lot of things together. They just kind of established climate change research institution with the university, with Tel Aviv University. So we are collaborating with them as long as we believe the same. They also have other interests, which are not only nature protection and climate change. So sometimes we also have to fight with them, but we kind of manage to do that both, to keep good relationship and to fight them when we can. So definitely. And about the removing fossil fuel, COP20, the last COP indeed had in the final decision a say that I thought was kind of surprising to the good side, because for the first time, you know, the COP, this is the 29th time that this organization is meeting, And after 30 years, for the first time, fossil fuels got into the decision. But it got into the decision by saying that the world has to do efforts to looking forward, phasing away fossil fuels. So that is a direction call, which is important, but that is still very far from really putting like timeline to this. And our timeline is a little bit limited. So yeah, we're trying to push forward also in those conferences, definitely.
Thank you very much for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We have a question about what is happening with the Dead Sea and or the Red Sea. I am not exactly sure what the specifics are, but I know that the Dead Sea is receding dramatically. So maybe you can address that.
Yeah, so the Red Sea, I just said something about the main problem in the Red Sea today. After many years of working to stop all kind of other threat on the Red Sea, today the major threat is this pipeline that we are fighting. That's in the Red Sea, down in the south. The Dead Sea is continue to be in bad shape. That's what I can tell you. It is decreasing more than 1 meter a year. The reason for the decrease of the Dead Sea is majorly about 2/3 of this decrease in sea level in the Dead Sea is because the north, the water that are flowing into the Dead Sea are coming from the north, from the Jordan River, and there are dams at the above the Sea of Galilee. There are dams both in the Israeli side and in the Jordanian side. The Jordanian needs this water. Israelis use it for agriculture and for the Sea of Galilee. So the Dead Sea just doesn't get enough water. That's probably 2/3 of the problem. The other third of the problem is the mineral extraction, the plants that are working there. And we are also working on that aspect. We are trying to push through a better way to allow, because Israel now has enough water from the desalination plant, we can allow ourselves to free more water into the Jordan River that would flow into the Dead Sea. But that requires several things. It requires, first of all, a cooperation with Jordan that we have to do. We do have cooperation there in Jordan. We moved to Jordan between 50 to 100 cubic meters per year of water from the Sea of Galilee. We do need this cooperation because Jordan still is lacking water. And we do need a very big push towards putting the cost of that on the mineral extraction plants, the factories, because otherwise we're going to have no way to finance that. And actually, the license of these factories is going to end in 2030. And now we're doing work to try to convince the government with many other environmental organizations, not only us, that the new license there would be, new concession for the Dead Sea would be such that would allow us to start maybe, restore this sea. But there's a lot of work there. It's not going to be easy.
Right, thank you. I think we have, it's kind of a comment rather than a question, but maybe you can address this. One of the attendees stating that she's seen herbs grow in Israel and the US no matter what happens to the weather. The same herbs grow to heal us. They still grow with pollution and cars and everything else we do to this planet. And also, plants grow just as they're supposed to, no matter what we do. I think that is important to know. So this attendee is commenting that plants will grow regardless, it sounds like. It sounds like we just need to have the opportunity to allow them to flourish, which I guess is the idea of rewilding. And maybe you can address how do you rewild and get the right plants?
So again, I totally agree that plants will grow if we let them. So that's why the most important thing and the first in line for a solution is to just protect. Protect doesn't mean to be involved. Protect means to make sure on the books of the state that this land is not going to be touched by any construction. So we're going to zone this for, especially for protection, and that is the most important thing. And then we allow the nature to do its course without any intervention. That's the best thing that we could do. But unfortunately, in many places, nature is already, destroyed, and we have to restore it. And it's a very tricky thing how to restore it. So it's a very good question, because it's not easy to restore. We're kind of, the direction is to be restoring areas. So we would need as much less intervention that we can. That means we will try never to bring water, for example, with energy, but use gravitation. So we're going to, of course, allow the natural flowers and species to be there. We're not going to enforce. We're very much against, for example, planting trees where they're not allowed to be, which is something that people now sometimes think, because, climate change, we need more trees, let's make the whole world tree. But if that's a desert, it shouldn't be planted with trees. By the way, this is one point that we are not aligned with the Jewish Fund. They want to plant everywhere. So yes, we are very much towards allow the nature to take the course. Sometimes, in Israel, for example, the wetlands, we don't have any wetlands that we can just allow. We must restore them and then step back and allow it to, work by itself. And we try to bring knowledge from Europe and from areas that are a little bit closer, from people who knows. We try to learn. We still have a lot to learn about it.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take one more question, and then I'm going to let Rachel make a comment, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and what we can do. So the question is, one of the objections to the proposed renewal plan is that it seizes power from local communities and would centralize decisions in bad ways.
Of the renewables?
It's called the renewal plan. That's what the comment says. Did you refer to a renewal plan? Maybe it's renewable. Maybe it is about renewables.
So I'm not sure I understood the question, because actually one of the major benefits of renewable it is decentralizing. Instead of having one or two offshore oil rigs, which is what we have today, controlled by private company and the government, they're getting all the money. Instead of that, and it's also a very, very sensitive to attacks by missiles. In the beginning of the war, we had the major gas rig stopped working, because if it was being hit by missiles when it was working, it was being devastating. So it's very much not, this is centralized. It is centralized both economically and security-wise. When we go into the renewables, to solar energy, we can allow people to have their own income from the energy that they produce on their roof. And we can allow small communities, like we already have in the south of Israel. There is one area which produces all its energy from the solar, Eilat. And this is much decentralized, actually. So either I didn't understand, or
I was mistaken. Nancy is here to explain what her question is. Go ahead, Nancy.
Thank you. I was referring to the plan the government has announced to rebuild the Western Negev, which I think is called Tekuma, and that it envisions seizing control from local communities and imposing a set of decisions on what's to be done, which I guess includes the commercialization that you referred to. So as a political issue, and the local communities having to resist the current government's attempt to make all the decisions. That's what I was referring to.
Yes. So, okay. So that's something else. Yes. Currently, I was referring a little bit to what we're doing in the war. And indeed, currently, there is this attempt to plan how are we going to rebuild it. And indeed, the government just published a bill which takes all the power to them. And we are working with the communities to try, of course, resist that. They're trying to do very much to, it's not only about the energy. Generally, they're trying to kind of make the decision and not letting the communities we have people that are working in the planning committees and with the citizens from these municipalities to try to resist that. So hopefully we will manage to succeed at least partly, if not all.
All right, thank you. We've jumped around from a lot of topics and you covered a lot of ground. And some of the comments have said, thank you so much for your so informative and clear and really interesting. I think people are really appreciating learning about the situation in Israel from you. Let me turn it over to Rachel. She has a couple of comments, and then we can talk a little bit about what's next. Go ahead, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matt. I'm actually here. I'm looking at you on my big screen. I have to look at you here. You guys are all over there. What I want to say is actually a segue into what people can do. One, I just wanted to say in terms of the Jewish National Fund, JNF, that was mentioned, they're not a major funder of our work or of the Society for the Protection of Nature. And while we do, as Tamara mentioned, we do have some projects mostly to do with water where we work together. To be clear, and I'm saying this because I think it's not clear, the Jewish National Fund is a development organization that was created to develop Israel. They're involved in development projects. And the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel is an environmental organization, which is about conservation, protecting wild open spaces, as well as promoting urban nature. But open spaces is our essence. And I would say, that there's, just to be really clear, I'm not telling people not to support JNF, but to be clear that they do not support us. And that when you make donations to JNF, that is not an environmental donation. That is not supporting work that mitigates climate change. There, you might have reasons to support JNF, but if you want to make donations to support conservation, wildlife protection, rewilding, bird research, bird migration research, any of these kind of things, environmental education, or much, much, much more. That is the work of the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. And yes, Nancy posted something in the chat. I'll just say, in America, JNF is actually a different organization even than it is in Israel. I think the people that that work for JNF in America might be environmentalists to themselves. And they do some educational programming here in America that is more green. But in Israel, they're a very political organization and it's about development. So that's enough about that difference. I also just want to tell people other ways that you can get involved. If you're people that like this kind of education, we have SPNI runs webinars. They started during COVID, but like many things we discovered during COVID, like Zoom, it turns out to be a fantastic thing. We already posted a link in the chat that you can find to a webinar that we hosted about the impact of the war on nature and what is being done about it. So you can see a webinar where somebody's talking about that for 40 minutes. We have a webinar about, it looks like, Jessica, do you want to post another webinar about the Takuma, or is that the same webinar about the open spaces? And if you...
I think it was Jessica, just the general website. That's what she posted.
Oh, okay, that's great. If you go to the website, what you can find in the events section, scroll down and you can find links to many, many past webinars that you can watch to your heart's content. And if you're interested to going to those live so you can ask questions, or getting our newsletter, you can sign up for that on our website as well. I think those are some major ways. Tamara, do you have other ideas of ways that you can get involved?
No, I think you covered it all. And I want to add, I see that there is another question, but I want to add that, of course, you are very welcome to contact me or Rachel with any other thought and questions, or like if you have specific ways that you would like to be involved, and yeah, I think a direct conversation could assist also.
And thank you. And the last thing that I'll say of things that you can do is that I think because the organization has been supported for 70 years, like 85% by Israelis, people just don't know about it. And this new government is changing the situation on the ground in Israel, and we have gotten money from the government for a very long time. And that is also at risk right now. So now more than ever, we need to introduce SPNI to the North American Jewish community. That's my mission. And so if you have any other group that you think would benefit from a talk like this one, or a more general one that I did, like that I gave at Fred's synagogue last week, we can do in person, we can do remote presentations. And I think that it's a really fabulous way for people to think about Israel that is positive and not controversial, not political, and doesn't make you cry.
I will just follow up with that. If anybody wants to take Rachel up on that, I highly recommend her coming to talk with your local group, with your synagogue. I thought I knew a lot about SPNI, and just her little presentation last week at our congregation, my eyes opened wide on things that are going on. SPNI is doing, since the war started, amazing things. You wouldn't believe. You have to hear it. It's a whole other talk, and I recommend it highly.
Well, Fred, you got the last word. Sorry if anybody else
Just-
had any more questions.
Well,
But
thank
thank you very much, Rachel and Tamara. That was fantastic.